great as well. It's going to be given by Jozsef Meszaros, a postdoctoral fellow at Columbia University. He can be found on Twitter at NeuroJojo. He would like it to be mentioned that he's an active member in the postdoctoral union at Columbia University and was a member of the negotiating team between the postdocs there at Columbia and the university. So please contact him if you're interested in anything related to that work, which I think is a really great idea and that you guys are pursuing. So with that, I'll let Jozsef take the stage.
Hi, everybody. Thanks a lot for the great talks, Catherine and Alexei. I think my talk will follow up nicely with a lot of the themes you raised about the stories we tell about each other and the stories that other people tell about each other and their brains. So here I'll begin my talk. It's about violence, neuroscience, and the legal system. It is a little bit of a Halloween themed talk. So for the international audience, Halloween is like this holiday in the United States where people dress up and try to be very scary. As it turns out, every day in America is pretty scary, and it's kind of like getting scarier. So as I begin, I'm going to talk about kind of two stories. One of those stories is that we have this legal system in the United States and much of the rest of the world where we have sticky concepts. And I don't think that neuroscience is going to challenge a lot of those concepts. So some of those concepts include vengeance, blame, responsibility, harm, and the idea that there's a culprit and the culprit is the one who did the bad thing. So I'm going to talk about that theme first, and then I want to talk about another theme where neuroscience might possibly influence the legal system by working with and not against these concepts. So first of all, a question for us, especially like younger people in this group who are, shaping their careers, should we use neuroscience? And I'm not saying results, but intuitions. Results can be very hard to obtain, but we want to put very rigorous standards on our science, but we develop a lot of intuitions doing neuroscience. Should we use these intuitions to influence the legal system? And I think some of us may feel timid or modest about our contributions and will say, no, that's like different. We're doing science, politics is separate. But I think it's worth considering that fields like economics have had an outsized influence on the way that we think about the law. And no one really said, hey, economists, please change the law. They just went in there and did that. So, don't feel too shy about using neuroscience as well to influence the legal system. So where does this story that I'm going to tell begin? Well, it starts around 2004 when a very influential article of the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society B published an entire issue about law and the brain. And in that issue, Robert Sapolsky, who's a very prominent neuroscientist, authored an article, The Frontal Cortex and the Criminal Justice System. And said, neuroscience could and should do away with criminal law as we know it. Very big pronouncement, right? The Economist a few years earlier said, genetics may threaten privacy, kill autonomy, do all these things, but neuroscience could do all of that first. And yeah, it is The Economist, and they do say really weird things sometimes, like that autistic brains are wasted. So I'm not sure how much we trust The Economist to really predict the future. And in any case, let's take a look at whether either Sapolsky or The Economist or the tons of other people who went down this line of reasoning were right. So there's this meme, I like it, how it started and how it's going. Okay, so how it started. Criminal law revolution. Oh, publish tons and tons of paper in law and neuroscience because we're going to figure it out. and then throw, of course, tons of money in it, right? Because no one's going to do this work. Alexei kind of hinted at this unless we fund it, right? So the MacArthur Project, because this isn't really an NIH thing, it's kind of like an intersection of two fields. So it has to be like kind of a quirky thing. And the MacArthur Foundation is like this big foundation in the United States. You may have heard of like the Genius Grants and stuff like that. That's the MacArthur Foundation that gives that out. So how has the, at least United States legal system interpreted some of the neuroscience contributions? Well, we used to have a thing called the insanity defense. If you were judged to be legally insane, you could get basically not guilty verdict, right? You were insane when you did the thing you did, so you're not guilty. Well, actually, Kansas was like, no. Insanity doesn't exist, whatever. So if somebody has a schizophrenic delusion that, you know, God told them to kill their neighbor, that doesn't get heard in trial. That doesn't get heard by the jury. That's not really relevant. The relevant thing is that this person killed their neighbor. Okay, so whether you have schizophrenia or whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is that you killed someone, so you go to jail for life, or you get the death penalty. It's also possible. And if you think that's just a weird Kansas thing, the Supreme Court heard a case about whether this was a constitutional law, and they decided it's perfectly okay. 6 members of the court, including some of the very conservative members that we like to always bash on, and also Elena Kagan, rolled this out. So now any state within the United States can just eliminate their insanity defense. So we went from thinking that we were going to use neuroscience and all these lovely, elegant results that we have to change the way that people think about guilt and responsibility and culpability. And the Supreme Court took that football and just spiked it and said, you know what, actually, like, we have other things that we care way more about than your neuroscience, or whether schizophrenia involves overactivation of D2 and whatnot. We actually just, you know, if you're guilty, you're guilty. All right. So that was kind of the first part. There's these incompatible notions that make us feel maybe uncomfortable as neuroscientists. So could neuroscience influence the legal system by working with some of these concepts? All right, so the way that it goes is, you know, neuroscientists, they focus on the brain of the offending individual. So if you committed a crime, the neuroscientists are like, oh, well, there's no free will, or, you know, you had this gene variant of MAO, and it happens to correlate with violence. Or, you know, addicts, they have these reward pathways, they get hijacked, et cetera, et cetera. Well, okay, but you could also do this other thing where you looked at the brain of the punisher, not the brain of the person that is on trial, but the brain of the person deciding. And that's what Oliver Goodenough proposed also in that Philosophical Transactions article. And that article, you could look it up, it's called Responsibility and Punishment, Whose Mind? A Response. Okay, so neuroscientists, you know, they're saying we're a product of like molecules and circuits, but I'm a jury member, right? You know, I have to think about vengeance, blame, responsibility, harm, who's the culprit, et cetera, right? So what do I do? Okay, well, the accused brain, it has like, you know, molecules, neural circuits, it has like pathways and stuff. The punisher's brain, the punisher, who's the jury, they want to think about like who did the harm, who is the culprit, who's responsible, et cetera, right? How do these two brains interface? Like, how can you think about them, you know, thinking of each other? That's basically what we have in this situation, right? So I want to think of a hypothetical, right? We do a lot of like opto hacking in all of our neuroscience experiments. You know, you get this pathway activated and then the animal goes left or bites a cookie or whatever. Okay, let's say that you have a situation where you have an evil neuroscientist who pushes a button and it activates a part of the brain that causes an individual's neural pathway, maybe it's in the hypothalamus where the aggression circuits are thought to be located, to become overactivated, right? And then that person's hypothalamic aggression circuit becomes really excited, and they do some kind of behavior, violates norms. Maybe they hit someone or they kill someone. Okay, you know, I put that to the audience right now. Like, who would be guilty, right? I mean, I think we all say that it's like the scientist who started this thing, right? It's not the person, like, but nevertheless, right? Like, these cases can come up. This is not made up, right? So if you are interested, there was a clinical report in an issue of Neurology. I'm not going to go into all the details, but basically they used a stimulation. They didn't expect this to happen, but they stimulated in this hypothalamic area. And what happened was that within a few seconds of the stimulation, the subject who had his brain being stimulated became very aggressive and violent. And it wasn't confused. It wasn't like a seizure. It was like very, intentional or, just like directed aggressive behavior. So let's say that that individual hadn't been restrained in time and he assaulted someone in the operating room. Do we want to find him guilty of assault? I mean, it really doesn't seem like we do, right? Okay, so how can we make the legal system sort of compatible, or in what cases does this even come up? I think in this situation where, and I said this is kind of scary, there are these third parties, right? There could be a third party, and the involvement of a third party could allow neuroscience to come into the legal system. And when you have a third party, you have a culprit, you have an evil act, the shocking the brain or whatever it was, and you can punish that third party. So a lot of the aims of the legal system can be achieved by sort of thinking of this in this neuroscience context. And you can rehabilitate, take the third party away, take the opto or whatever, take the stimulation away, and maybe the person will recover their normal, pro-social behavior. So there are some kinds of neuroscience work where you do.
Jozsef, I just want to let you know you have one minute left.
Perfect. So there are neuroscience kinds of neuroscience work where you do see that you can shift blame to a third party in these kind of criminal contexts, right? So there's Deborah Deno, and she's looked at how lead poisoning very, very strongly predicts whether someone goes on to be a violent offender. There's other studies that look at CTE and how that increases the chances that people commit violent acts. And I also have a study, a very long law journal article looking at how people who are experiencing intimate partner violence will commit crimes. And maybe we should think about the third party who is involved in that. So thank you. These are just acknowledgements and further reading.
Great. That was really, that was another great talk. This is one of those sessions where I wish we were important so we could all go to the pub after and chat. So I appreciate that. If anyone's got any questions for Jozsef, please post them up. We've got a couple, we've got one question in the Q&A that's pretty relevant, Jozsef, I think, which is how can we make the legal system comprehend neuroscience concepts, which I think is really at the heart of the issue. It's one of the hearts of the issue, maybe.
Yeah, I think you have to realize that the legal system is us, right? And no matter how much neuroscience you read or absorb, it's really hard for you as an individual to be completely okay with someone who stabbed your best friend or, did something really horrible to you. So you have somehow to take the neuroscience that you know and integrate it with the kind of moral concepts that you have always had and that civilization and societies often have, been created around. So, neuroscience that says, oh, there's no free will, everyone is actually just like this molecular machine and so on, that's just not going to really it's not going to land well. It wouldn't land well with you when you're, considering your friend, and it won't land well with trials and jurors. So I think, just making a better connection between the legal norms and the neuroscience studies would help.
Yeah, I really liked the visualization that you had of the Punisher and the, I can't remember the two phrases that you used, but the accused and the Punisher. because it really drives home the point that actually we are talking on two very different levels, and integrating across those levels is hard when you're trying to like write a talk to get people interested in your research. But it's way it's way more difficult, and the stakes are much higher when you try to make that integration at that level, which is jumping not only to like, oh, I need to create human interest, up to societal implications. And that's just a really it's just a really tough nut to crack there. I think that that's a real, like, an illustration that really drives home the point. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up. We are already over time, but I think it's because these were just such great talks, and I'm wish we could all give you a round of applause. But thank you all for listening, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys at some talks later in the future.
Yep. See you.
Ciao.